Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Recession Proofing Your Fleet, presented by Merchants Fleet. My name is Brad Jacobs. I'm the VP of Fleet Consulting and Product Development here at Merchants, and I will be your moderator for today's event. And I'm joined by our panelists, Cindy Douglas, Program Manager at Tough Shed, Ron McWiggin, Fleet Manager at Turnpoint Services, and Izzy Romero, Manager of Fleet Services at Progress Residential. So I encourage you to ask questions during the webinar event at any point. We'll try and address them all. However, if we don't get to yours, you will be contacted by email with a response after the event. So with that, let's get right into our content for today. So the automotive industry has become increasingly complex for organizations to navigate, certainly in the current environment and with the looming recession. It's important to be thinking about the different savings, the different program improvements that preserve cash while still having the vehicles to operate your core business functions. And today we're going to talk with three organizations that, despite all of the uncertainty, especially over the last couple of years, they continue to grow, they continue to break records, and we'll hear about the strategies that they've implemented to create value for their organizations that could potentially help yours as well. And that's our goal for today, is to share that information with the broader audience and members. So with that, before we hop in, just wanted to provide a little bit of perspective around planning for a recession, and mostly the insight in terms of what companies generally think about when a recession is looming. And it's five simple things. One, from a fleet perspective, is controlling operating costs, but also from a business perspective as well. How can I maintain my budget? How can I do more with current budget? Or if we're planning from a forecast perspective for budgets to rescind, where do I put my operating costs? And operating cost dollars to be the most effective. On the vehicle side, don't buy, lease. From a procurement perspective, when you're outlaying and fronting a lot of cash, leasing could be an option to look into as far as getting the most value out of the money that is available from within an organization's budget. Conserving cash, like number one top of priority. And to do that from a fleet perspective, right sizing is key. How do I do more with the same amount of vehicles? Or how do I right size the assets, the inventory that I am using, so that I can help to reduce my TCO and take cost out of the operation? And then also monetizing. How do I look at my fleet as a potential revenue generator for the business, extracting money out of the fleet, whether that means equity or other avenues of vehicle value that can be put back into the organization. Those are all possible to do. We're going to talk about some of those today, especially with our panel members. So going on to the next slide, just to illustrate a couple of key components. Depending on what is possible in the current environment right now, the upfitting order to delivery lead time for an upfit vehicle, it could be as high as 53 weeks, depending on the supply chain, the different parts, components, any shortages that are out there, and that needs to be planned for. There are options to get inventory in non-traditional methods. It's not all about allocation and out of stock. There's options that are in the marketplace around pools and leveraging immediate inventory and available inventory for particular buying tranches that can be a potential solution and trade-off to help reduce cost while putting fresh vehicles into service. There's no question that a good fleet management policy, practices, governance, they can reduce cost per mile by 20%. We've seen that time and time again. Even within established and mature programs, there's always opportunities for savings, and being able to bring those savings opportunities forth to the broader table helps the fleet team add value when we think about savings and from a recession standpoint to the broader organization. We have experienced, the highest interest rate increases in the last 14 years. There's no question about that. That's at top of mind for a lot of folks. The question of fixed interest rates versus float interest rates are something to discuss, and we'll talk about that as well throughout the panel today. And it's possible to recoup equity through a simple paper transaction, and again, turn the fleet into a potential revenue generator if times do warrant it and organizations have an interest and a palate to do that. So Just a couple of tips and plays. We'll talk about leveraging liquidity within current vehicles, thinking outside the box and creative solutions, absolutely being flexible to get the job done. The people who are very, very successful, particularly the folks on the panel today, they've taken action, not freezed, and that's really, really important. And then as well, planning ahead so that there's shared understanding within the company around what the fleet is doing to tie in with the overall goals of an organization, whether that's cost savings, reduction, or whatnot. So with that, why don't we turn it over to our panelists? Why don't we start with Cindy? And Cindy, the first question, as it relates to just the recession, how is Tough Shed thinking about a potential recession? What is some of the dialogue internally that your executives are having, and what are you being asked?
Well, our internal is always on recessions is homeowners are our customers, right? So the last recession was harmful to our business because people were losing their homes. So if that's the customer you're selling to, you kind of lose a big chunk of your customers. We all predict and see a recession coming. We don't think it's going to be anywhere near what it was in 08, 9, and 10. But for that, we are always looking at and planning, like, how is this going to impact our business? The things that we do immediately is focus on customer service first, because you can't afford to lose the customers or the referrals that you could get. So that is point one that we always take into consideration. On a fleet side, we're always looking, where can we reduce cost? Again, it's always looking at, are we right-sized? Do we have underutilized vehicles? Are we overspending on fuel? Those kind of things. So that's what's going to help us try to stay on budget and not have inflated cost if business declines.
And Ron, what about from your perspective?
For us in our fleet world, one of the things that we've really focused on, and Cindy touched on a little bit there, is utilization and underutilized assets. The industry the last couple of years and just vehicle availability has driven people to hold on to stuff longer. They don't want to give a vehicle up because they're afraid they won't be able to get a new one. So what we've really dove into in the last 6 months is how many vehicles are sitting, and we use our GPS and telematics to tell us, how often they're moving, when they're moving, where they're moving, and then, deciding, making the decision, right sizing and saying, okay, these 4 vehicles shouldn't be in your fleet. We're in a good spot now. We've gotten you new vehicles. You're all set up. So now we need to move on from these. And it's kind of, a strike while it's still hot, because the used market is still, values are up. So move them out of the fleet. Again, you're not maintaining vehicles. You're not putting batteries in vehicles because it doesn't start after a few weeks, things like that just add up. Insurance, all the back end pieces that you get rid of by cleaning them out of the inventory.
Yeah, going back to that taking action that we were talking about before. Izzy, what's Progress Residential thinking in terms of recession and recession proofing?
So fleet-wise, we've taken a look at our entire fleet, which is currently sitting over 1,100 vehicles. When we've analyzed, as well as everyone else has, what's not being used, what's sitting, are we seeing overspending on certain vehicles? So we have started to move out vehicles through attrition. We're not directly impacted by the recession like most commercial organizations are, but we do definitely have to make sure that everything's on budget and on target. So for us, our main focus has been just to make sure that we're always right-sized, and we're doing that by making sure that the vehicles that we have are being used at their full capacity, and anything that's overage, we are liquidating and tapping into that into it. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So let's stick with you, Cindy. So, you guys have been in growth mode. You guys have been in acquisition mode. It's resulted in a bit of an interesting fleet makeup. Can you talk a little bit about how that has had an impact overall, and what was one of the, from a sale leaseback perspective, what was important in that process for you and your organization?
Yeah, so for us, for COVID actually caused our business to skyrocket. We were in a steady, solid, substantial increase year over year, but COVID kind of blew it up just because people needed offices or schoolrooms, or, everybody was using their home in a manner in which they weren't using their home anymore. And right before COVID, we had acquired a company and a lot of their assets, being fleet, trailers, those kind of things. And it makes you humble when you take over stuff that isn't well managed and isn't well tracked, or like I couldn't even find titles on vehicles that were owned, those kind of things. So, when you start in this process or you're acquiring new assets, it's really important to make sure that you are completing the documentation on your side as needed, whether you're filing for federal compliance or getting your titles and registrations and stuff like that, because there's a time when you need it, and if you can't find it, it becomes a nightmare and adds hours and hours on end to absolutely everybody that has to handle it. For me, I always have to have an officer sign any official documentation. So, during COVID, I would actually send an email out saying, who's in the office today, so that I could arrange to have documents signed and notarized, those kind of things. So I would say find it, be on top of it, keep it organized, and make sure your ducks are in a row. So in the event that something falls apart, it's easy to find and dispose of assets quicker because you don't have to find the documentation that goes with it.
That's a great point. And Izzy, along those same lines, let's go over to you. When we talk about processes and streamlining processes, you guys actually had consolidated a number of vendors as part of your corporate initiative. Can you talk a little bit about that? What was involved? What did that unlock for Progress Residential?
Of course. We were actually spread out over 3 different FMCs because we acquisitioned a new organization, which, brought their own fleet on. And it was kind of difficult just to juggle the day-to-day between the 3 FMCs. So we felt it was just in our best interest to consolidate it all under one, so we could continue to focus on what our primary concerns were, and that's making sure that our fleet was running efficiently, making sure that drivers were getting the assistance that they needed from us. So what we ended up doing was we were slowly phased out the other 2 FMCs to ultimately end up with one that allowed us to streamline all of our policies and procedures.
Mm-hmm. And why was that so important to Progress?
It was important to us because to us, our drivers are our customers, just the way, our tenants are our customers as well. So we want to make sure, that along the way, everyone was being taken care of adequately. So it was super important to just make sure to focus on our internal customers, which were our fleet drivers, instead of having to juggle, all of the work on the backside, trying to work with 3 different FMCs, instead of focusing on what we were really there for, to assist our drivers and also make sure that our fleet was running efficiently.
Sure. And one of the other strategies that you guys had leveraged was extracting equity out of vehicles through a sale leaseback. I think it was about $1.7 million you guys were able to recoup and use in other areas of the business. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? What did that mean for Progress, and how are the funds used?
Sure. So one of the FMCs wasn't really willing to work with us. So what we ended up doing was we purchased out the leases prematurely from them. And then what we did in turn was take them to the FMC we had chosen and did the lease sale back. And like you said, we were able to tap into $1.7 million worth of assets that we've actually used to put right back into our fleet program, which has allowed us to purchase additional vehicles over the past 18 months.
And how was it getting buy-in to make those changes, right? What did that process look like internally? What were some of the keys to success? How did you ultimately get executive level buy-in for that strategy?
So, as everybody must have experienced during the pandemic, a lot of our processes got delayed. They got pushed back, due to the pandemic. So it was almost fairly easy because they were seeing the situations that we were running into, especially with licensing. We weren't able to, license our vehicles, tag them, which was just, putting our drivers into a position that, none of us want to find ourselves in and, running around in vehicles that aren't licensed. So just with the development of everything that happened during the pandemic, we took it to the executive level and said, hey, these are the issues that we're facing. We tried working through the current FMC doing this, and unfortunately that has not worked in our favor. We've found this one FMC. We've kind of streamlined our processes way beforehand. So it was fairly easy to be able to make that transition and get that buy-in to transfer everything from 3 different FMCs to just one to be able to focus on what we do.
That's great. So let's go over to Ron. Ron, Izzy talked about streamlining to one FMC. TurnPoint was in a little bit of a different situation in terms of the why, but you guys ultimately consolidated vendors as well. So can you talk about some of the decisions that TurnPoint made and what was the importance from a fleet management perspective?
Yeah, so when I started here at TurnPoint, we were managing everything internally. When I started, we were 24 brands. So we were handling invoicing, we were handling titles, registrations, 24 different ways. And from my fleet experience, I knew that was just not something it's not a repeatable model. You can't do it over and over, go into a new market and say, hey, you do things a little bit different. Let's try that. So we knew we had to standardize. We had to get everything in, with one company, partner with someone and make sure that it was the right fit for us. And that's really what we did. I mean, we went from, in less than 2 years, 24 brands and 1,600 vehicles to today we're at 57 brands, 4,200 vehicles. So just being able to have that all in one place, titles, registrations, vehicle maintenance, purchasing or leasing, all that stuff in one place, it's a one-stop shop.
That's a great point. I think in 4 years, you guys went from 40 million in revenue to about 1.4 billion in revenue, if I'm not mistaken. And certainly that growth and efficiency has been a key balance. So let's go back to Izzy. Anything else to comment around the sale leaseback? And you were spread over 3 FMCs. Anything else that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, the lease sellback allowed us to, tap into equity that existed in the vehicles, which ultimately allowed us to grow our fleet by almost 100% over, the last 18 months, which is really astonishing considering all of the difficulties we've seen out there in the market, especially when it comes to procuring vehicles, not being able, to get really any vehicles from the OEM manufacturers. So that was very big and very important to us to be able to, have the allocation to, as we all seen, pay the increased cost to be able to acquire the vehicles that we needed to continue to grow during that time space.
That's great. And then Ron, it was a strategic play that you guys took advantage of. I think that there was cash there to fund some future CapEx of leasing around 700 to 900 new trucks per year with that $6.3 million. Do you want to expand on that? Is there anything else you want to share there?
I mean, really, just in the growth mode that we were in or still in, just, the funding for it, we hadn't really looked at that before because we had managed everything internally. So we were just purchasing outright. When we got into conversations with the FMC that we partnered with, we just decided, hey, let's look at the financials. Let's see if it makes sense. We got our CFO involved and ran the numbers, and it was pretty much a wash. But it took so much off of our plate that we didn't have to worry about being able to utilize the FMC for allocations that we had assigned to us, pool vehicles that were out there available, and just leveraging the relationships that the FMC had with other vendors, upfitters, stuff like that, to find vehicles out there for us was a huge advantage.
Yeah, let's talk about the inventory pools a little bit if we could, Ron, because that's a bit unique. You had acquired, I think, 120, 130 vehicles or so via an inventory pool. What did that process look like? Why was it important to TurnPoint, and what was TurnPoint's reaction to procuring vehicles out of a pool where maybe ordinarily it would be a factory order or an out of stock?
Yeah, so that was something that we had never done in the past. We weren't accustomed to that. But when the opportunity arose, like Izzy was saying, just allocation and availability has not been there the last 2 years. And in our growth mode, we were reaching for anything that we could find. So the opportunity came up. Our FMC partner said, hey, we have some, 1 to 2 year old vehicles, 10,000 miles. Would you be interested? So, we jumped on the opportunity. We completed the upfit, got them to our customers, and, we're able to continue to grow the business and provide vehicles so that we didn't have to slow it down because of vehicle availability.
And let's go back over to Izzy. So you guys utilize inventory pools as well. How did that benefit your organization?
We did. So actually in August of 2021, we found ourselves in a position where we did not have enough vehicles coming in to fulfill the needs of our residents. So unfortunately, it left us kind of in a predicament where we were overwhelmed with service calls. So we tapped into our FMC's inventory pool, and we were able to allocate 2 to 3 vehicles in about 7 different markets within our organization, which allowed us to actually have to make more service call completions. I think it was around 368 more per week, which is really, really big. In our organization, considering we manage over 90,000 homes.
Yep, that's great. So Ron, now that you talked about going to an outsourced FMC, you talked about getting the administration benefit from a cost perspective. But there's also intelligence, right, that comes to you in terms of information, data to make effective business decisions. Can you talk to us a little bit around how that has helped make decisions that has saved money for TurnPoint?
Yeah, so with everything being in one location, being able to look at it from both a high level and dig down into the details, true cost of maintenance, what are our costs, where are we spending the money? Again, when we're spread over 57 companies, and it was, if someone didn't involve you in the process, you had no idea until the bill came through to get paid. Hey, we spent $10,000 on an engine. Hey, that probably didn't make sense being that the vehicle has 150,000 miles. So that's where the FMC process and everything running through approvals and all that, we get to see all that before the money's already out the door. Again, turning, getting old vehicles out of the fleet, we utilize our FMC partner to dispose of vehicles for us. It makes it a pretty flawless process, pretty seamless. We can make a phone call, say, hey, this is the address, this is the information for the vehicle, and they give us options to get rid of it. Really, one of the biggest things, eye-opener, is being able to run total cost of ownership and be able to present that to our company's leadership, our brand leaders, shopping manufacturer to manufacturer and just putting the numbers, I always say the numbers don't lie. So when we put the numbers in front of them and say, if you're buying vehicle X, this is what it's going to cost with an upfit. If you buy Y, this is what it's going to cost. And here's your variance, for every 3 vehicles of brand X, you only get 2 of brand Y. So again, it's something that, with our FMC partner and building out our builds, our designs, our layouts, upfit and all that kind of stuff, we're able to manage that cost, know what's going to give us the best bang for the buck, and continue to support our brands and get them the vehicles they need.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing that. So let's go over to Cindy. At first one might think that telematics, connected vehicles, it's as a way to keep drivers and assets safe on the road, but there's definitely other benefits to the technology as it relates to saving money. Cindy, how have you used telematics as it relates to recession-proofing the fleet?
Well, we use telematics for all kinds of reasons. Our biggest, our drivers do think it's Big Brother watching you, right? But I can tell you that every year I have 7 to 10 vehicles stolen off of random locations across the country, and we've recovered every single one of them in the last couple of years. So right there, right? You're not down a vehicle completely that has been taken from your facility. But I do look at it the same way. I always say I love data. You need to look at it and analyze it. You don't have to necessarily like the story it's telling you, but it allows you to make an educated and informed decision about changes that need to be made to help you obviously save costs. So clearly, if you have vehicles that are sitting at any location that are not being driven on a regular basis, that is underutilized. And whether it drives or it doesn't drive, you still have a lease payment to make. You still have to pay your monthly insurance cost on it. Obviously, depending on the type of vehicle, you're going to have it being depreciated and or causing increased maintenance expenses because like diesel vehicles need to drive all the time. Otherwise, your seals are going to break and cause other issues. But it also gives you the ability to see trends. Like we see that this Model X has these expensive costs come about at around this mileage rate, right? So you can start to see trends. It helps you to be able to decide when to cycle out stuff. So if you haven't been utilizing that from that standpoint, it definitely helps you determine like, okay, 80% of this vehicle type is seeing this maintenance issue that's costing us $10,000 at this mileage interval. So one location may hit that mileage interval in 3 years and another may hit that mileage interval at 6 years, depending on the area they're covering, but it still allows you to determine, I need to cycle this out, knowing what the lead times are now. I need to order this sooner rather than later. So it actually gives you more than just where is my driver today notifications.
Exactly. And by the way, Cindy, you're one of the best that I've ever seen to take the data, take the ideas, you use it to facilitate change within your organization, particularly within the field. Are there a couple of things that you want to highlight that you've been able to implement that you think the broader group would benefit from?
Yeah, so speeding is the big thing, and it is an issue for every company, right? In most instances, company vehicles are branded. I classify them as driving billboards. So it is your company's reputation out there on the road, depending on the driver that's behind the vehicle. And I believe if you can reduce speeding, you can reduce a lot of other costs. You're going to reduce any harsh driving conditions that are out there, so cornering, braking, accelerating, those kind of things. But you're also going to reduce your maintenance costs on your vehicles as well, right? So if you have a driver that is not a good driver, he's not treating your vehicle well while driving it. And so that is going to help reduce unnecessary cost to the vehicle. So for us, we focus on speeding. We focus on it so much that since we've implemented where we're currently at with the GPS, we're on our third reiteration of our driving policy. And it is once again coming back to speeding. We do take input from the drivers because you have to be conscious of that, right? If you drive every single day of the week, at some point you're going to have to slam on your brakes because an idiot's going to cut you off. At some point you're going to have to accelerate around a larger vehicle to try to get there. So we look at it as what is realistic from that standpoint. Like, how many times should I allow you to harsh brake in a 7-day period? How many times should I allow you to do those kind of things? And so we're currently rewriting our driver policy again, and we're looking at it in different aspects, but we are focusing specifically on speeding because speeding's gotten even more out of control since the pandemic. And I don't know if you have noticed it even as yourself driving to and from wherever you go, that apparently the roads were empty and everybody decided it was the Autobahn, right? That we can just drive as fast as we want to go. And so it's gotten worse. So we're taking a look at it. I remind my drivers, we pay you by the hour. I really have never understood why they're in such a hurry to get to where they need to go. Because if they drive and hit more, I'm just going to put more on their plate. But in the end, it's also about not being liable, right? We live in a litigious society where people, if they see your brand, think you have money. And if you have a minor fender bender at 15 miles an hour, you can get hit with a massive lawsuit. And you don't want them going back and looking at every driver out there and how bad speeding is in your organization, because you're just going to give them money in that instance.
Great points. Great points. I like your hourly thought process there. Izzy, let's go over to you. How is Progress utilizing telematics and linking the data with other services?
So we use our telematics for two different things. So our telematics system's actually linked into our fuel card. So the vehicle, every time it pumps, it links it to a transaction on the fuel card. So we're able to see, in real time when a vehicle fuels, it translates into the actual transaction. How many gallons did they pump? Or what was the cost of it? And those type of patterns. So it makes it easier to see fuel discrepancies as well as possible fuel fraud. So let's say the gas card gets used, but the vehicle didn't get fueled or it wasn't at the location that the transaction took place. So that makes it more visible for us to see. We also use our telematics system just as Cindy's organization does, is we use it, the alert system, to actually see every time the vehicle is throwing off codes. And those come immediately to us as soon as the check engine light comes on or, some type of code is thrown. We get the code. We're able to reference back to the manual to see, what type of urgency there is behind the code. So do we need them to stop immediately, which we have, sometimes vehicles overheat and people tend to try to push the limit on the engine. So that's when we come in. We're like, hey, you just threw a overheating. Please pull over. We're gonna tow the vehicle in, right? Save some money on a new engine later on. And then, also, the other codes, things that we don't see, for example, like if your evap system has a leak, which would also cause your fuel economy to go down per mile per gallon. So those are the different ways that we use our telematics system. Like Cindy, it's not Big Brother for us. We're not sitting there watching them, how fast are they going. Every single minute we do use speeding alerts. We have thresholds. If you go beyond that threshold, then it will be brought to your attention. But for the most part, for us, the telematics data that's provided to us through our telematics company is tremendous in helping keep expenses down in our organization.
Yeah, and Ron, Izzy talked about the data. Can you talk to us a little bit around how TurnPoint's using the data and what it's been like to adopt a new telematics provider?
Yeah, so we recently switched to a new telematics provider. We vetted several of them. Just the amount of information, reporting, everything that you could pull out of it, was pretty eye opening. Two of the biggest things for us are idle time. Everyone, says, idle time. How long did the guys idle their vehicle? We've heard numbers from 10 minutes to 30 minutes a day. Well, when you can run the report and it shows you the idle time, we're about a third of the way through our implementation. We're doing telematics with a forward-facing camera. So the telematics side of it, we're about a third of the way through completing our fleet. And just this year alone in idle time, I think our potential fuel savings on just idle fuel was somewhere around $150,000. And again, we started implementation in January, so that number has ramped up the more vehicles we get in and the more time. So by the time we're fully integrated, we see that number easily being over $1 million. The other piece of the telematics that we see is the forward-facing camera, and some of our drivers, managers were thinking, oh, this is a Big Brother thing, and to like Cindy had mentioned, people see a name on the side of a van and they do a little homework after they were in a little fender bender, and then they say, oh, this is a pretty big company, there's potential here. So with the forward-facing cameras, we've already mitigated at least 6 accidents that people said, hey, you hit me or you ran into the side of me. And we have video of them, making an illegal turn, smashing into the side of us as we're yielding, something like that. So, I mean, that is a huge, huge opportunity. And like I say, the bigger the company is, the bigger they're going to, the more they're going to want to lawyer up and come after you for stuff like that. So those two things, idle fuel and just being able to make sure that, hey, if there's an accident and we were at fault, we know we're at fault. But at the same time, if we can eliminate, again, six potential lawsuits, in the first 5 months of having it, and only being a third of the way through the fleet, that's a pretty big number.
Sure is. That's definitely significant. Let's shift over to the connected side of things. So, Cindy, how is Tough Shed thinking about connected vehicles and connected adoption?
My goal is to get everything through connected vehicle. One, because again, accident. Prime example is somebody, I don't remember who, went in and obviously downloaded the data from the actual manufacturer of the vehicle and then used the data from our third-party telematics, and he was like, there's a discrepancy. What am I supposed to believe? And my response is, you are supposed to believe the vehicle data. I would never, you're not going to take a third-party provider over the actual manufacturer's data that is monitoring the vehicle. And so I want to be able to move everything into connected vehicle. One, it's going to save me weeks, if not in some cases, depending on a market, months, to have a third-party installer come out and install that device. So I don't deliver my vehicles without them because it's like giving a child a candy, right? And then taking it back saying, oh, wait, no, you haven't finished your dinner, right? Those kind of things. So once my drivers get their vehicle, the chances of me getting it back to install a third-party device are slim and none. So I always have delays waiting on third-party providers to physically install them. And then I won't have that expense either. I'm not going to be buying that equipment up front like I do on top of waiting for the install. So anything I can do to get the vehicle in the hands of the driver sooner is better. And again, I'm going to rely on the data straight from the manufacturer over third party every day of the week in the event of an accident.
Yep, great point. All right, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about one of the big elephants in the room. So there's been a tremendous amount of overarching uncertainty around inventory availability. And all of you are really in growth mode in your businesses, as you guys have shared over the course of our time together today. How has ordering mentality changed for you specifically, for your organizations? How do you manage the uncertainties as it relates to allocation and inventory shortages or order cancellations, as an example? Why don't we go around the horn? Cindy, why don't we start with you? What's your mentality been? How have you had to shift to be successful in this environment?
Well, I used to have time to actually analyze all the data and provide recommendations, right? I used to have that ability to say, based off of what we know to be true, it's time to replace these vehicles, and I had time to do that. Now we don't, right? I got the email last week that says, these models are opening on June 5th. We don't have pricing, and you need to order. And I don't know how long that order window will be open. So that order window may be open for 2 days, or it might be open for 2 weeks, or it might be open for 2 months. So now I get the notification, I do a quick dump, I send the analysis over to my regional team saying, we have the order banks opening on this day. Here's what you have, here's what's on order, and I hope that every order I place gets built. But in other cases, I just have to change models, right? This is available. So we just had that happen on sales vehicles. I had 2 different models cancel my orders. We found where we could go into a hybrid and they would guarantee manufacturing. So we went ahead and switched. So you need to just go with the flow, react on order dates and hope your orders get processed, and then order uncomfortably. You might have to order something you wouldn't replace, but you don't know if the order's going to get processed. So you just have to go with the flow and keep your fingers crossed it actually gets delivered.
Great points. Izzy, let's go over to you. What about from your perspective?
So we've actually started to order vehicles that we had never used before. Our fleet mainly consists of cargo vans. We use the big T250s as well as the Transit Connects. As we all know, Transit Connects are going away, so we obviously have to expand our fleet with the different type of vehicles. So what we did last year is we looked at all the different model offerings through Ford, just kind of looked the ups and downs and what was the capabilities of the vehicles to be upfitted. So we actually ended up ordering some Rangers. We were able to order 150 of them, and we were astonished when 150 of them came through. At the time, we just did a tonneau cover, but now we're in the talks about how we're going to upfit them to meet the needs that we currently use the Transit Connects for right now. So more than anything, it's expanding the possibility of the vehicles that are available out there to fit your current vehicle needs. And
Ron, what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, for us, very similar to Izzy and Cindy's stories, getting out of that comfort zone, when you're with one manufacturer, the ins and outs and that stuff, just getting out of that comfort zone and saying, okay, we have to be realistic. This is the number we need for this year. Are we going to get them from one manufacturer? Probably not. So expanding, options, looking at different things. Again, just, non-standard type of vehicles that you wouldn't have purchased in the past, looking at them for opportunities, different brands. Again, it's been a different world out there the last couple of years, and you just have to adapt to it or you're going to sink.
That's certainly true. A lot of truth to that. Goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning and taking action and not being complacent. So look, just before we wrap up here, we got a couple of questions that have come through the chat. So we definitely want to answer those. But just to wrap up, just a couple of takeaways. So one, tackle your allocation limits. There's absolutely options that are out there, whether it's within your existing fleet or whether inventory pools, to help supplement allocation. The key is just finding those opportunities to do that from certain providers. Navigating the short order bank windows. All three of our panelists hit on it today. The importance of ordering early, ordering uncomfortably. From a merchant's perspective, we've seen customers place orders well before any of the cap agreements are negotiated, before pricing's released. Like, those days are in some cases behind us now. And if you're going to get orders in, you got to do it right away and not wait. Leveraging the alternative inventory pools, great way to supplement allocation. Ron talked about the importance of that to his business and helping to open up some new brands, some new locations. Izzy did as well. And then certainly Cindy with the connected vehicle telematics offerings, definitely ways to reduce cost, to keep businesses not only moving at their current state, but also growing. Hopefully what came across today is that all three of our panelists, companies and organizations are growing tremendously. And they've been able to take solutions and a solution mindset and put things in place that have helped them to grow, save money at the same time, and continue to scale. So thank you guys very, very much for bringing value to your organizations, and then certainly sharing all of your successes and some new ideas, hopefully for our audience today. So with that, we hope you all enjoyed today's webinar. I do want to thank Cindy, Izzy, and Ron and Merchants Fleet for today's presentation. Let's hop over to the question and answer portion. So the first question we have is from Michael Homine, who asked, what was the tax impact of the sale leaseback capitalized, and how did that impact the overall transaction? Ron or Cindy, I don't know if you guys want to comment on that. I'm certainly happy to comment from a general perspective, but do you guys want to share anything there that you might have?
Yeah, I don't really have anything on that. I turned that portion over to our CFO and let him handle that part of it.
Yeah, and mine was so long ago, I don't know if it would be the same today as it was even just 2 years ago, because we did our lease buyback in 2012 or 17. I don't remember. It's been 11 years. So yeah, 2012. So I don't recall, and it wouldn't be the same today.
Yeah. So I'll just add a little bit of general dialogue, general comments. So there's a couple of different ways that a sale leaseback can be performed. The most popular one is with owned assets that an organization owns outright, whether they were funded with cash or they're funded on some type of bank line or whatever. Let's take funding with cash as an example. So all that money was outlaid up front. The sales tax was placed on the outlay up front, right? Because you're procuring a vehicle just like you would go out and buy, anything at the store. Now with a sale leaseback, once the lease comes back to the organization that's doing the sale leaseback, so it depends on the state. Some tax will be up front, depending on that state's laws. Other states will have what's called a use tax or a stream tax. Then that tax is paid on the monthly rental. So there is a taxable event that's associated with a sale leaseback transaction. However, that is considered by most CFOs, as Ron was saying, a cost of the transaction. And if you look at the amount of money that an organization is going to get back, it's in the millions of dollars typically. So let's just say $5 million. A CFO is going to look at, hey, I have an opportunity to recoup $5 million worth of equity out of the vehicles, and it might cost me the sales tax, plus the interest on the lease stream going forward, but that's generally between 4 and 6% of the overall transaction. So you look at what an interest rate is today at 6%, or some cases even higher, depending on an organization's credit rating. And the cost of the transaction with the sales tax all of a sudden starts to make a lot of sense. So it's not necessarily a barrier because there is a cost of the transaction, which is why Ron and Cindy were saying, hey, it really wasn't a big deal for us. So there's options there from a tax perspective. Michael, hopefully that answers your question. Next question. Hi, Aljo from Comcast here. Thanks very much for your time and insight. did any of you face serious internal hurdles as it pertains to change? For my region alone, I'm having to fight through selling old equipment, let alone leasing instead of owning some of our vans. What are some smaller steps, in your opinion, that can show an impact and a path forward towards insulating the organization against a recession?
Yeah, so for us, getting the buy-in obviously was tough. 57 different brands that we bought together. Again, they did it 57 different ways. So getting that buy-in was tough. Being able to show them, hey, now you can log in, be able to see your registration, a title, any of that stuff that before they were scrambling. Someone had it in their desk. This one's not there. Now that it's all on one platform, we know where the titles are if we need to get rid of them. We utilize our FMC partner to dispose of our vehicles for us, and they have a couple options for us. One is they give us a purchase price outright, which includes debranding, picking it up, all that stuff. So it just makes it a no-brainer. So when you can start to introduce those little extra things that weren't handled that way in the past, you start to get the buy-in. And then when you can show the results and, just say, hey, if you're going to have centralized billing, you're going to remove X amount of invoices being shuffled through your office on a weekly or monthly basis. Now the centralized billing, you'll still be able to see the detail, dive in, but you're helping them remove stuff from their plate and helping them focus on their job.
Yeah. Cindy or Izzy, do you have any? Yeah, go ahead, Cindy.
I'll say, Joe, what I would do is, number one, data is your best friend in this scenario. So, I was coming off the last recession with two different FMCs and converted into one when we did our lease buyback. That wasn't the hard part. What the hard part was at that point in time is now I had to take where we didn't buy anything and going into buying new and doing replacements. So you got to start with the data that's available to you. You should be able to know what you're spending on maintenance and how those costs are increasing. So before I had done that, my maintenance bill back was 43% of my lease payment, which was astronomical. And as you go and replace newer vehicles, your cost of ownership or your maintenance is going to drop down into the teens. And that is just what you can look at from a data standpoint. You can never measure the amount of downtime, windshield time, upset customers from your vehicles being out of service due to age. So I say start with the data that you have at hand and start looking at what you're spending on a maintenance and your downtime, because that right there will prove to your regional management team that this is what you're losing, not including your upset customers and downtime with your employees.
Yeah, and I'll just add one other thing, Joe. So as it relates to selling some of the old equipment, there's programs that are out there that don't require contracts to sell assets. And it's real easy to implement. And it's a simple process where, a company would identify a small group of vehicles or assets to sell, equipment to sell, and, a guaranteed price for those vehicles will be provided. And then, Comcast would incur the guaranteed price and proceeds. And then the entity who bought those vehicles takes them off your hands, and then it's their job to go and determine what they want to do with them. So the money can change hands in as few as 5 days. And it's just a really nice way. It's a nice small bite to start with 3, 4, 5, 10 assets, whatever the appropriate volume is, and show some successes, show some quick wins. And again, when that money starts flowing back into the organization, that can help to get traction to bigger efforts in a hurry. So might be something to think about there, and certainly open to more dialogue on it. Okay, so with that, I think we've answered all the questions, and that's the time that we have for today. But if anyone did have a question that wasn't answered, we'll certainly be following up with email to answer your question individually. And also want to mention that this webinar is available on demand on Automotive Fleet website at automotivefleet.com/webinars. So thank you, Ron. Thank you, Izzy. Thank you, Cindy, for your knowledge and what you shared with us today. We certainly appreciate your participation and your commentary along the way. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.